everybody. Welcome back to another fun live stream. Before we get started, I see everybody already saying hello in the chat, but let's share where you are all tuning in from.
Yeah.
We're going to be starting off in just a couple seconds, but it's always nice to see where everybody's tuning in from, right? Myself, I'm actually in California. And we'll do intros in a second, but David's over there in Florida, so even we're in two different places. So, okay, we got India from Kartik, UK from Syra, nice. CT, is that Connecticut, Rich? Tunisia, oh, awesome. Cool.
Oh, wow.
Welcome. Awesome. Welcome. I love seeing so many different places in the chat. It's so great to see how these live streams reach other people. We have a really fun agenda for you all today. We're going to be going over MCP. MCP is the new protocol for AI agents to communicate with each other. We'll learn and dive deep into them today with the content. We'll have some hands-on stuff that you can follow along with, and even some fun interactive things. But before we kick off, just some quick housekeeping rules. Not rules, but just some things for y'all viewers to keep
adhere to the rules.
Yeah, just things for viewers to keep their mind on. So this will be recorded. So if you're live, then amazing, welcome. But if you want to refer back to any of the content that you are seeing today, don't worry, we will share this at the end after the live stream is over. And for anyone who has questions, please use the Q&A tab. I believe it should be on the right hand of your screen. And then throughout the live stream and throughout the content, we will have some breaks where we'll stop and answer some questions for you all. So don't worry, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But let's kick it off. Again, my name is Melissa. I'm a DevRel engineer here on the Langflow team, and I'll be co-hosting today with David. David, take it away.
Hello, everybody. So I do recognize some of you, and hello again if you've been on one of our streams. I am David Jones-Gilardi, a fellow Gen AI nerd or developer relations engineer. By the way, I do want to make a quick call out to Sabri from Chicago. Hello, I'm from Chicago. I don't live in Chicago anymore, but
David will always make a point to call out that he's from Chicago.
No, it's the best food, right? It's absolutely the best food. New York's pizza does not cut it. No, I'm purposely throwing shade because it's fun. All right, so as Melissa just said, we're going to focus on MCP today. Now, I did, in the beginning of this, I see a bunch of you voted on some of those polls. I did ask some questions if you've used Langflow before. If you're familiar with MCP, it seems like some of you are, some of you aren't. I'm just going to give the most basic of primers, and then we are going to get into actual stuff because I like doing things and showing real stuff and all that kind of deal. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. And, I also try really hard to make sure everything is like super zoomed in. I do recognize that sometimes on these streams, it can be hard to see things. So feel free to mention something. If you need me to zoom in, Melissa will gladly yell at me. All right, so first things first, MCP itself, right? Just a very quick primer. If you're not already familiar with MCP, it stands for Model Context Protocol. And that acronym, or that may not mean much on its own, but really, I think the best explanation I've ever heard of it, it's like the USB-C for agentic tools, right? Anthropic introduced, I don't want to say back in November, so it's been a couple months now. It's been maturing, right? But what it really does is it allows pretty much a very kind of simple universal interface between agents and their tools. Right. So if you think about before things like MCP, if you wanted to connect up to a tool, you usually, had to build some type of tool. You have to adhere to its API, things like that. MCP just simplifies this a bit. Now, where does Langflow come into this? Now, so I'm going to give you just a very quick primer on Langflow. For those of you new to Langflow, Langflow is a visual IDE that allows you to build out generative AI and agentic AI workflows. It is a low-code, no-code tool, but for you coders, I have stuff for you, and I'll show you that in a moment. So it kind of, honestly, I feel like it like bridges, it kind of like sits a little bit on the fence between dev and non-dev. But it's real to me. The real benefit comes from being able to very quickly iterate on very complex generative AI and agentic workflows. That's the tool we're going to be using today, along with MCP, to start putting some stuff together. So the site you see here is just langflow.org. By the way, there is a new desktop version. So if you don't want to have to worry about doing a pip install or anything like that, you can just install the desktop version and go. It is probably the quickest and easiest way to get going with Langflow. And by the way, Langflow is open source, right? So you're not going to be asked for a credit card or anything. You can literally go to the GitHub repo and go. All right, so why don't we go ahead and actually get into a little bit of MCP itself and using some of the tools. So what I've done, by the way, is I've just created a very quick, flow of an agentic flow here in Langflow that has a set of MCP tools. Now, for those of you, again, not familiar with Langflow, how might you do this? If you came back out and you went to like this new flow here, and then you said simple agent, right? That will essentially give you the setup, a setup very similar to this, where you have an agent component. This has all sorts of providers. I've been using OpenAI's GPT-4.1 lately because it actually, I don't, if you're not aware, 2 weeks ago now, I think OpenAI just launched all their 4.1 models. They're super good and they're cheaper than the 4.0 alternative. And they had, this is something that they had said online, do we trust it or whatever? I've been using them since they have released, and I can say yes. Like so far in my experience, for the amount that I hit these things, they're actually quite capable, and they do in fact seem to be cheaper. So I'm like super happy about that because I keep running up bills. Yes,
Me too.
Yeah. So if you just take a look at the layout here of Langflow, you'll see on the left-hand side, we have all sorts of components. These are like input, output, ways I might chat with my agent. You have data components if you want to interact with data. All sorts of processing capabilities, ways to massage that data and everything, because as you're working through these like agentic workflows, sometimes you need things like, filters and ways to work with data types and all that kind of deal. But one of the things I really like to point out about Langflow that I think makes it so powerful is it's totally model agnostic. Like you can see just a huge amount of models that are supported on the left-hand side. It's the same thing with vector stores, right? Now, again, I say that, and then I'm using OpenAI's GPT-4.1 mini here, but it's the same thing with the agents, right? So it really does allow for a lot of flexibility. Now, Langflow itself already has a huge amount of tools, right? So if you were to not only look under the tools section, but all of these bundles, right? All this kind of stuff. I'll pick on Composio here for a moment. You see that it is already a tool, or they have another one here, right? I can put this in a tool mode. You see it has these tool modes that you can switch to, right? And that'll allow you to just literally wire them up to your agents. Like you see these nodes, you can just wire them up. Now, if we're talking about MCP, why am I pointing that out, right? It's because while MCP exposes you and expands the list of tools, the amount of tools that you have, it essentially just adds on to what Langflow already has, right? So, there might be you might be able to find MCP tools for some of these things, but, not all of them, right? And so it really, it just increases the flexibility for what you can do with your agents. Okay, so enough of that and the Langflow primer piece. So how do we use MCP in Langflow? Well, the first thing you probably need to do, and I did see some of you responded to the poll, how many of you used MCP or you're familiar with it, right? One of the first things you probably want to do is find some MCP servers, right? So you can go to GitHub repositories like Model Context Protocol here. And this has this really, let me blow this up a little bit, actually. Hopefully that's easier. It has this huge list of all these MCP servers, right? Fetch is like a really simple one. So if you click on one of these and you look into it, what you're looking for are, how do I configure them? Now, you'll notice that a lot of them say configure for Claude. Why? Because Anthropic were the ones who originally came up with this. Of course, it's part of Claude. But you can use these same commands, like this UVX or Docker commands, inside of Langflow to install and execute on these same servers, right? So there's a pattern here, and I'm going to show this to you here. So you'll see there's the command and then whatever arguments. In the case of fetch, right, it would be UVX MCP -server -fetch. So if I come over to my Langflow, okay, and I'm just going to pull one of these. I realize I literally have one sitting there on the screen, but I'm just going to pull it out so you can see, right? Notice the command UVX MCP server fetch. So if I want to then use that particular server, I just follow the command, is what it comes down to, right? And then when I come into Langflow, I say refresh. It's now going to install it locally and then make a call and find out, hey, I have this fetch tool. And if I then hit that, it's actually going to expose all of the various properties and such. It'll tell me if they're required. It'll tell me what these are. Now, what makes MCP so cool with when you're working with agents is the fact that the agents can then read essentially this contract. They can look at this and they then understand, oh, okay, I have a tool called fetch. It has a max length, it has raw, it has start index, and it has URL. What are these things for, right? So it's going to read this information. And then that is how the agent will then be able to dynamically invoke the tool with the right parameters when you need it. Now, what's interesting is you can use it like this, like right here. This would be kind of in a serialized way where I'm not using it agentically, and I would pass in like a URL and get a response. I could absolutely do that. But then if I come up here and I say tool mode, it will convert this into a tool. I will now have whatever, information came from the MCP tool, and that literally allows me to just wire it right up. Boom. Now my agent has access to that tool, right?
So quick question, David.
Yeah,
so we could think of MCP as what we like foundationally know as tools to agents then, right? But
yes.
MCP kind of brings us closer to even more tools is the idea here.
Yes, absolutely. And it makes it much easier to work with them. Because what's happening, okay, in a sense, is if we take a look at, say, previous tools, and this is not a knock to them, there are pros and cons for both the MCP approach and the regular tool approach, right? But if you take, I'm going to pick on Composio again, right? If you take like this Gmail one or whatever, they have specifically built this tool. And if you look at the code underneath, I was talking about for those coders out there, you have access to all like the Python. But if you look at the code underneath, usually you will find that it's making a call to their API. And then it has to understand that API to some degree in order to implement the tool. So imagine then for each individual tool, if they're especially from different vendors, you're going to have a different API. Right. So from a developer standpoint, or from somebody building a component here in Langflow, I need to know something about that API. Right. The agents, the models and the agents have actually gotten good enough in a lot of cases where sometimes you could just throw them an API and say, go figure it out, and they'll do a pretty good job. But if you want something to be consistent and everything, you really do need to know that API. What MCP does is it kind of removes some of the need to relearn a whole new API.
Yeah, it like level sets all these external tools.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way. Yes, that's a great way to put it. Exactly. So what this also means is that when I want to add capability here in Langflow, then again, in this case, I just need that MCP command, right? So if we take another example real quick. Now, by the way, if I were to come to this, here, let me get rid of my images. If I were to come over here and say like, summarize the top features of langflow.org or something like that, right? An agent without a tool that can go to the internet and do things wouldn't be able to do much, right? So you can see right here that it's accessing fetch. So what's happened is I've just asked it a question to go get something from langflow.org, and now it's using this MCP tool, and the agent's doing that on its own. And what's happening is it is looking at the metadata, right? This information that it gets, the tool description and the name, it's looking at that metadata of all the tools that it has to say, oh, which one is the best tool that I should use for whatever case, right? All right, so here, while that's doing that, I want to pop over real quick to a different tool here real quick, because I work a lot with vision models. This is actually something that I found particularly exciting. I don't know if I see thumbs up or folks in the chat, like how many of you have worked with vision models or you're working on actual applications that you're using to generate images and such. There are multiple platforms that do have like multimodal support. But then what I found, especially with something like say EverArt, and there's others out there, where now there's an MCP tool out there that allows me to interact with the EverArt API that makes it super easy for me to just start generating images right in my AI flows, right? And again, it's the same convention. I'm going to put in the command. I'm going to put in npx-y, this. The one difference is if there's an environment variable need, like you see here, you just pop that in the front, right? So I'm going to show everybody my code, essentially, is what it comes down to.
What that looks like.
But you see this env everart API key, right? And then blah 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 blah. There's my key for everybody to steal.
Then everyone's gonna steal it. Yep.
Yeah. Which I'm gonna go take. I'm gonna go get rid of. But then you can see here that I just have the command, right? So
Yeah.
it's almost like I'm in my terminal and I am like, doing an export env and giving it that value and then just passing that along. And then that will allow that to invoke it with that particular key, right? So then I can come in here and I can do something like this and say, create an action figure image of a cute animal in a blister pack. And let's see what it does here. I should see that. Good. So generate image, right, is the tool that is exposed here from everart, right? And what's super cool about this is that as part of the everart spec, they actually have different models for different things. So there it goes. So the agent is able to determine, right? Yeah, the agent is able to determine, that should be in line, yeah. So now the agent decided, which model and everything like that to choose. You can see it actually chose model 5000, which is the Flux one. And you could tell it, different models or something like that. Maybe do a let's create a Ghibli scene, right?
And when you're asking these questions, for example, you're saying Ghibli, and then the agent can intuitively know, oh, Ghibli. So we're talking about generating an image, and then it uses the everart MCP server to then generate this image.
Yes.
And then earlier, when you were showing the first example, like search about Langflow online, it then knew to use, okay, I need to use the fetch MCP server.
Yes.
And with your choice of model, GPT 4.1 was able to determine that with the agent component, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. And that, by the way, that is why the tool name and description is so important. And we're going to really we're going to get into a more complex example here in a moment. But that is why that name and description is just so important, because you don't want your agent to get confused, right? You want it to be able to correctly determine what tool you need, especially now. If you think about it, if we come back over to our over to the model context protocol servers page, there's a lot of them. I mean, the other one I didn't mention
was that might do the same things, but just from a different provider. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot. Now, I think there's something to be said here. MCP is still maturing. Some of the components, some of the tools can be a little rough, honestly. Right. So you got to have like a sharp eye and kind of like test things and stuff. Now, there are some that are absolutely wonderful. I've actually been using the GitHub ones, the Google Maps ones a lot. The everart one is actually very solid. I really like what they did with theirs. There's all sorts of stuff in here, but there's just a lot now. And by the way, this is not all of them. Those are just like their featured ones. If you take a look at MCP.so, there's just a ton in here. But I would definitely, again, you need to have a keen eye. I kind of start here on the model context protocol GitHub first. And then if I can't find it here, I'll go to the MCP.so. But again, you'll find that generally, Melly search. Look at that. Is that searching on Melissa?
Oh, did I do that? I made my own MCP server.
But the general flow is if there's that's kind of cool. If there's if there is some particular server that I'm interested in, I'm going to look for that again, the command and the args. Yep. Right. And then I can just literally pass it in to my component and go. Right. So that makes it like super powerful from that standpoint. All right. So I'm going to move into some other things, but I want to just stop for a second. Let folks breathe. Do we have any questions or anything we should answer?
None in the Q&A unless folks want to start dropping some in the chat, but we'll give it a second, but none in the Q&A right now. So I think we could keep going.
Got it. And I did see some questions about where am I pulling the MCP tools from? And I see Michelle drop those links. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, awesome. So now, yeah, Arvind, if you have a particular example you're looking for, go for it and tell me. But I'm just about to talk about one, actually. So another example here is if I were to pull one out. Oh, for debugging and IDE control, that's actually an interesting question. I'm going to save that in a moment. Yeah, that's actually a pretty interesting one.
Someone asked, how do you differentiate the different MCPs in the same Langflow project?
Oh, yeah. So, all right. So for one, the name and description will help from the agent standpoint. But if you're asking like here, what I tend to do is I will literally go to the little edit button. I can just click on the component if you didn't see that, right? Click here.
You can rename them.
Yes. And then
Yep.
I would do something like this. I do that all the time, right? And then I'll come up here. You know, I've gotten so used to it though, that to that point, I've kind of, I don't always do it just because I know exactly which ones are which. But no, I did actually in one of my bigger flows that I'm going to show you in a moment. This is exactly what I did, right? You know, and there's another mode that I'm going to show you in a second, where you can use your own Langflow flows as MCP tools, which is super cool and important in a couple.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it actually gets into some really neat use cases, and that's kind of what we're going to dig into. So hopefully that answers the question. And then I do see another question here. Is there a feature in Langflow to create model card like comments for human readability? Oh, do you mean like here? Are you talking about like where I can go blah 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 blah?
Like a README or something?
Yeah, you can do that right there in the top of the component if that's what you're referring to. So let me know if that's not quite what you meant. Okay. All right. So what I want to show you next is there are two modes to MCP. Right? And you'll see this in the component itself. There is standard IO and then there's SSE. So standard IO is the mode that you've seen where you're essentially issuing commands directly here in the field. SSE is where you are providing you're providing the URL to an MCP server. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that Langflow itself is in fact an MCP server, and it exposes all of your flows as MCP tools. So this kind of offers up some really interesting combinations and complexity and things that you can do. And you'll notice when I switched to this SSE, it immediately grabbed the endpoint of my local Langflow. And you can see at the end of that endpoint, usually if you've already worked with Langflow, you'll be familiar with that /API/v1. You'll see here I have this /MCP/SSE, right? So that endpoint is exposed as part of your Langflow install that will then expose all of your flows. And when it refreshed, you see now I have all sorts of flows that actually are exposed as tools. I can also put this in tool mode. Right? You see this over here. And once it grabs those, now I have all of my flows and, you know, flows names and descriptions. Now this gets into something really, really, really important. And this kind of goes back to a question you asked a moment ago, Melissa, which is like, you know, or I think one of our viewers asked it is like, what happens? Like, how do you differentiate these? It's one thing to do it so it's human differentiated. But as I mentioned before, those names and descriptions are super important.
Right.
It's no different with your, I'm going to get rid of that one. It's no different with your flows, right? They need to have descriptive names and descriptions. So if I pull back out of here and I go into something a little bit more complex, this one, the one I'm going to show you here in a moment, you'll see that the names and the descriptions are built to be very explicit, right? Matter of fact, I found that the agents easily got confused between the research agent and the deal finder with the original description. So I had to go and make sure that those descriptions were unique enough that the agent can rightly grab the correct one for the correct need. So if you have multiple MCP tools that kind of do the same thing or similar things, you might really either choose one or really ensure that they are kind of like choosing specific paths, unless you don't care that your agent might choose one over the other depending on like the scenario and stuff like that. So that is kind of a very that's a very important part of that. And then one final thing I'll say about this component here is when you're using like the SSE mode, whether it's Langflow or some other server out there, and you have the tools, you notice that you can enable and disable them. There might be one, like my database ops agent. I really don't want that exposed all the time, because then that would open up operations to my database, right? You know, because it's like a helper function that I use, funny enough, in Cursor. So it's, you know, it's something that I do in other places. So you do have the ability to turn these on and off. All right, so I think we should move over to my fun, more complex example. How are we doing on questions and everything, Melissa?
All good, all good. Unless, oh, we just got one in from Arvind. Hey, David, could you please show how to use the Zapier MCP in Langflow, like sending an email agent? We're going into an example just like
Yeah.
that, not using Zapier, but
Right.
in the email realm. So
Yes. Yeah. And as far as like Zapier, that's actually okay. This is kind of fun. Let's see.
do they have an MCP?
I don't know if they do. And I kind of like to also explain. Oh, look at that.
Oh, they do.
So similar to like Composio is kind of they're a huge like Composio makes all like I want to say hundreds of tools for agentic tools, and then Zapier, here's one right there. So I haven't messed with the Zapier one myself. I don't know how well it works or not, but it is sitting there on the page, so it might be one worth to take a look at if you have an interest there, right? To see what they're doing. Okay.
And to answer your question, Arvind, David showed how you can use the standard IO command. So
Yep.
if you go into where he just clicked in, which is accessible in the GitHub MCP GitHub, then you'll see that command and you can just drop it in your MCP component, just like
That's right.
this.
That's right. Yeah, Elena, SSE mode lacks the option to define HTTP headers. Currently, I believe that is the case, right? And there are, in fact, as a matter of fact, Melissa, we should flag that. I think that's really great feedback for the Langflow team. Yeah, funny enough, I've been, I've been working. We work very closely with our engineering teams and such like that. There are some fun. I can't say anymore, but there are some fun MCP enhancements and improvements coming for sure. But yeah, funny enough, Elena, I was just working with that yesterday. So yeah, not that I know of just yet.
And then another question from Kyan. If I create an agentic system using Composio or Langflow GUI, can I download the Python code and modify and optimize it?
Yeah. So what you can do, there's a couple different ways you can potentially do what I think you're looking at. One, for any of these components, you can get the code. You can pull it out if you really wanted to. I don't think that's the most efficient use of time, though. So if the question is, hey, I've got this flow, I want to bring this into my Python code, how do I do that? What you can do is you can export out your flow as a JSON file, a JSON blob. And there is a special library in the Langflow package. I want to say it's like load flow from JSON that will then ingest your flow and everything as a JSON object, but it'll encapsulate all of the logic into your code, right? So you're not getting, it's not like you're just getting a dump of all the Python, but it does allow you to inject it directly into your code if that's what you're asking. Let me know if that's if you have a follow-up there. Yeah, I see the question there. When you get a chance, can you repeat the concept of converting local Langflow to MCP tool? Funny enough, we're gonna work with that right now, right? All you need to do though is if you grab the MCP server component, just pop it in SSE mode, point it to the MCP/SSE endpoint of your Langflow. It doesn't have to be your local one, right? So if you have if you've deployed it somewhere or something like that, and you just have that endpoint, then that will hit it and it'll pull your tools. All right. So let me just back up just a little bit into what is going on here in this flow. So it's actually a set of flows. So I've built an app that it treats like email as an AI agent interface. We're gonna have some fun with that here in a moment, actually. So the idea with this particular app, and these are the supporting flows for that app, is that instead of having to worry about getting a key anywhere or doing anything, you could just have a conversation with email, with your email, and it would be a Langflow agent in the background doing a bunch of things, right? And you'll notice here that I have a research agent, a financial one, a geomapping, a price deal finder, a travel planning agent, right? So these are all capabilities that we're exposing to this interface. Now, if we break down what's going on here, we have our regular input, and that's just whatever's coming in through the email. Right? We have an agent. Again, I'm using GPT-4.1. I really like GPT-4.1 and 4.1 Mini lately. They've been very, very good at these types of tasks. And then all the stuff that you see here is the email part. So to the question about that, yes, it's not in Zapier, but I actually am using Twilio SendGrid in this particular case. And so I have a SendGrid email component. Funny enough that I vibe coded in almost a one-shot based off of the SendGrid API. Because I was using SendGrid and I needed a way to send emails and follow up in threads and such like that, right?
Vibe coding. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a
Oh
good
my
place
God.
to mention too, David, is custom components. In Langflow, if you look at the bottom left of David's screen, you could see new custom component. Yep, and they just dragged on, and you've been seeing that he's been showing that you can hop into the code of each of the components.
Yeah.
We have some docs that gives you this template pretty much and how you could build your own custom components. If you have a Python script, again, Langflow is built on Python, so if you're coding in Python, then you can bring in some scripts and use it within your flow.
Yeah.
So and this is how you could do it, by building custom components, and that's what David did with the SendGrid stuff.
Yeah, and by the way, to that, like Claude 3.5, Sonnet, OpenAI, GPT 4.0, 4.1, they're all very good at, you can literally grab this as a template and go into, like, whether it's, Cursor or just whatever, to your AI coding companion and say, hey, I want to build a component that does X. I want you to conform to this template. It does a very good job. That's pretty much the way that I start building components now, because it's so much faster. And it actually works really well. But the main point here of this part of the flow is all of this is here to set up the email send part. Like I said, this is the email as an agent interface. Now, where does the MCP part come into play? Why am I talking about this whole different app when we're talking about MCP? And this is the part right here. So remember that MCP server component? So if we open this up, you'll see that I have a set of flows that are exposed to this agent. Again, the name and the descriptions, right? I tried to make them nice and distinct, so they are, it's clear what each one does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the fun part. When an email comes in, I don't have to tell it. Like, I don't have to pick an API or pick an endpoint or anything and say, I want you to do the travel thing, or I want you to do the research thing or the financial thing. I'm using the agent LLM in this case to be able to pull those details out and choose the right tool. So this is the part when I said before that the name and the description really matter, right? Because especially if you start increasing the amount of tools that you have, you want to ensure that it's very clear to the agent what they're doing, right? One final thing I'll point on this before I do a fun little demo of something is, notice here that I have this is my main orchestrating agent, right? And then it's hooked up to a set of tools, a set of MCP tools, right? You'll see here that I actually have a sub agent, right? Any agent can be put into a tool mode and made a sub of another one. This one's job is to worry about emails, right? Its whole job is to send the email, format it properly, do all sorts of things. So this way, we're ensuring that the main orchestrating, organizing agent, that's exactly what it's focused on. Its job is to divvy tasks and to get the right tool, get the information back, and then send it on, right? And someone, you might ask, for some of the MCP tools that are out there, do you really need another agent? I'm going to get into that in a moment, and where Langflow comes into that. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to pop over to my IDE, and hopefully you guys can all see this. Okay, this is Cursor. I've been using Cursor a lot lately. I really enjoy it for vibe coding and everything. And it does have an MCP mode, right? So if I were to come out and I go to the cog up in the top and I click that and go down to MCP, you'll see this add new global MCP server, and you'll see I have Langflow in here. So if you remember a moment ago, I talked about that endpoint, right? This one here. So wherever my Langflow server is, again, all of those flows are being exposed as MCP tools. And I can come in here. And by the way, what I'm showing you right now is in the documentation, right? So we'll drop this link in here. It tells you how to integrate with both Cursor and Claude, right? So Claude is, both of them are a little bit different with how you set it up, but it's generally the same kind of thing. It's not too bad to do. Matter of fact, if we come back over to my Cursor, you can see this is it. That is the configuration that points to my Langflow. Again, that MCP SSE endpoint, and then that exposes all of these tools. So what does this do for me? Well, what this means now is that I can be here in Cursor having a chat with my agent on doing something with coding, right? But if there is some capability that I need that is exposed in one of my flows, now it's exposed. Funny enough, in one of the apps I had built very recently, Code Beasts, right? It generates these. I just realized I wasn't gonna bring it up, but I figured I might just Yeah.
David always wants to bring
I
up his
gotta
code
show the
base, but
code
it's
base.
super cool. It's super cool.
This part's my favorite part, right? You can generate these action figures of yourself, right? And based off your GitHub repo and all that kind of deal. But the point I'm getting at is why am I showing this? Is because I was able, by hooking up to my flows as tools, while I'm doing other things, I needed to say generate test images. I needed to come up with a data structure, things like that. So I can have these conversations with my AI agent while I'm coding in a very kind of flow-esque way, and then have access to these tools, right? Along with, I mentioned I was doing stuff with GitHub and things like that. I use the GitHub stuff all the time, right? I use my database stuff all the time. And again, I don't have to tell it. Most of the time, I do not have to tell it. I can just have a natural conversation with it, and where it needs it, it will grab those tools, right?
Because of the descriptions and the tool names that you've set, it's able to understand which ones are needed for a given time.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Okay, so now let's do something a little fun here. I am going to pull up. Here we go. Phew. All right. So what I'm going to do is this thing. Actually, let me get my other screen. Yeah, here. We're going to go over here. I'm gonna go like this. So we're going to see this in action, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out a set of test emails. You're going to send them. By the way, you guys, if you really want to, feel free. I mean, this is my dev. You're hitting my local machine, right? But if you send an email to dev.email-agent.ai, right? And ask it something, and you may not, depending on what you ask it, right? It may or may not give you an answer if it doesn't have a tool. But you'll see I have like the deal one, the travel one, the financial one, the research one. And so I've sent these 4 test emails off, right? So what it's doing right now, if you notice, I opened up the logs here so you can all see what's going on, and you can see there's all this activity, right? And if we take a look, I see Melissa sent one.
Yep.
Right, there we go. Yeah, so I see that coming in. But you can see now that what's happening is, I put the plus deal plus whatever in my email addresses so I could differentiate them. But what it's doing is the agent. Let's see how well the agent does, right? That's my research test email, and it executed the research agent. This is my financial one, and yeah, financial, right? My travel one, let's see. It picked the travel planning agent, and then the deal one. This sometimes, it might, it did do the deal finder. Cool, right? And so like the agent is determining which tool to use. And all this output you're seeing is that all of these are actually happening asynchronously, right? So right now that one's sending an email, sending my response. That one finished up. This one probably sent the mail. Yep, it says done. And we're going to check that in a second. And that one, there's the send mail agent. That one's going. Then whatever happened, your email is being sent, right? You can still see it's like working on these. So again, the agent now is able to kind of to divvy up these tasks, and it's really good at doing that one thing. Now, while this is doing this, what I want to show you is if we look at some of these underneath the hood, I think this is where Langflow really comes in when you're using MCP. Because you could easily make the argument, there are all these tools, right? If I have like an EverArt tool, or I was actually working with Excalidraw the other day, or whatever, like, why do I need to use Langflow flows as MCP tools?
Right.
And what it comes down to is the tools themselves are kind of like dumb interfaces, right? The agent is the one doing the work. Right. But sometimes you need to give it direction. You need to like kind of really, kind of narrow down its possibilities and things. For example, in EverArt, right? Depending on the agent, depending if you're using, say, Claude 3.5 Sonnet compared to like GPT 4.0 or whatever, it might not always choose the model that you want. And sometimes maybe you want a specific model for a specific thing, or Claude was super good at it. 4.1 is now very good at it, but 4.0 kind of struggled with getting the API right. So that might be a case where sometimes you give those instructions to an agent. So that's kind of like a little, like, a kind of a minor way to do things. But sometimes you might need to do something that's a lot more complex.
Yep.
Right. And so this is the travel planning agent. Like when you send an email to this and it happens to be something you're looking for, travel plans or something like that, it's actually going through 3 separate agents that have very specific jobs, right? So this whole thing is being exposed as a single MCP tool. So it allows you to do some more complex things. Same thing with the financial one. right? It's the same deal where I have multiple agents in place that all are specializing in various pieces, doing, web searches with Tablet AI, Yahoo Finance, things like that. So underneath the hood, when you're working with Langflow flows as tools, you can do some very complex things that you may not be able to do as just a regular MCP tool, right? And here, now we're going to see all these emails. Here we go, right? You can see now, here was one of the ones I sent that just came through, right? I asked it to give me the test email said, hey, what are the latest deals on the Nintendo Switch, right? And let's see, is this, is it the right link, right? Yes, it is the right link. That's actually
cool.
awesome,
Yeah.
right?
April 25th. That's pretty good.
Let's see. Oh, yeah, here we go. So today's April 24th, 2025, right? I asked it for NVIDIA's financials, right? So it gives me, stuff there. You guys are seeing all my emails, which is wonderful.
Let's just expose all of David's personal stuff today.
I know. Every once in a while, some of my my stuff goes to spam. Oh, and here's the research one, right? And then my cocktail. Now this one was actually tricky. Let's see if it did it right, because I live in Orlando, right? And I said, hey, I want to go to a cocktail bar tonight and stuff like. Give me a map, right? And yay. Let's see.
Nice.
Right? There's the Monroe, right? That's the place that it recommended, right? So it gave me a nice map to it so I could very easily get directions. Like there's all sorts of other things you could do here. So again, it's the agent that was able to choose those tools. Now, Melissa, you did one. Did it come back?
Yeah, I did one that triggered your travel agent. I'm going to San Diego in a couple of weeks. So I was genuinely asking recommend me some things for San Diego foodie nature itinerary. And it looks really, you can't see my screen right now, but it gives a table. It actually elaborates a day-by-day itinerary. So yeah, it did really well with that. And I got it back in my email.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. And if anybody tried it, by the way, feel free. Like I said, it's my local box. It's okay. Don't do anything terrible. But if you send an email to, I'll just say something, the something is whatever you want, at dev.emailagent.ai, it'll actually be kind of fun to try that out in real time and kind of see what happens. Now, I do see 2 questions that have popped up.
Yeah, we got some questions.
Yes. The first one there, can you elaborate on how you made the incoming emails the trigger in your Langflow? Yeah, so there's actually 2 different methodologies. And funny, I'm actually going to do a whole separate video on this email as an AI agent interface app very soon. I'm literally working on that right now. So I'm not going to go into an extreme detail, but I will show you that Langflow has the ability to use a webhook as your input interface, right? So you can actually just expose a flow as a webhook. And I'm actually using webhooks in this case from my SendGrid setup to then call. Now, in this case, though, I'm not actually using that. I'm not using it as a webhook in this particular case. And that actually ties directly in to the second question, which is, can Langflow API to our another system and one up? Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't the one. It was the, where'd it go? Oh, yeah. How do you handle prompt injection attacks, given that you're giving agent permissions? Yes, it's a great question. So funny. Oh, I see some coming through. Oh, hey, yeah. Arvind, hello. I see it. So in my particular case, what I decided to do was I actually created that code that we're in here, over here. I created a webhook handler. Its job is, this is actually my webhook, and it handles all the it does all that kind of stuff. So it is validating data and kind of ensuring that stuff doesn't happen. So the calls, the underlying calls, are protected. That's a great question though. And I think putting guardrails on your agents is actually super important from that standpoint. So if you're trying to build something that's actually really like a production level app or whatever, you're going to want to put guardrails on your agents, and you're probably going to want to have something on the input interface that does a little bit of cleaning too, right? That way you don't have obvious SQL commands or something like that in there. Let's see. Okay, what do we have next there, Melissa?
So real quick for Sanjay's question, can I call Langflow API to another system and want to pass extra data input? How can I do it?
To another system and want to pass extra data. Oh, do you mean like an API request? That sounds like
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So you can actually use an API request component. And my favorite feature of this, because I'm a big curl user, is say use curl just put in your curl command and it'll automatically fill out the headers, the body, and everything for you. Do I have a curl command handy? Let's see. I was literally just doing this the other day, and I'm trying to remember.
Use the webhook one.
Oh, do I have it here?
As a simple example.
Which one?
Oh, I just said the webhook one as a simple
example. Oh, it's my
example.
async data store. That's right. I had to remember like which one it was. It's this guy. Yeah. Here, I have one right here. So here's a curl command. I can literally drop it in, hit enter, and it'll fill out my headers and everything like that based off that curl command. As far as the data part goes, right? If we take a look at this curl command, you'll see I have the -d for my data payload. What I'm doing here though is I'm actually injecting data, a data object into the body of my API request. But if you wanted to modify that, what you could literally do is if I disconnect this, I could go in here and modify it, right? So if you have information, data that you're looking to inject, then that would be one way to do it. All right, let's see.
And then Fitton has a question kind of just about Langflow in general. It's built on top of LangChain. It's more of a no-code, low-code interface. But the concern is, as to what extent is it technically sound or correct to build applications without directly involving coding? Can we rely heavily on tools like Langflow? Will they limit our understanding or control over the understanding logic? Great question.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts.
Go for it. Yeah, I thought you did. I could see that you had something to say.
I mean, it's a very valid question. David and I go to a ton of these events, like AI events or developer events. So, we get this question a lot. And there's a rise right now of these kind of workflow tools, vibe coding, and things like that. But I can form an argument that Langflow doesn't limit your understanding. And this is my standpoint, right? It gives you the outlook to the code behind each of the components. So you know what's going on in the background. It's not hiding that from you. So as an understanding too, we're not fully abstracting what's going on in the background. You have full control to what's going on in the background as well. And also seeing things like this, seeing how David has built this in a visual way. As a developer, you work with tools like Figma, maybe Miro or something to kind of build these diagrams. I think of this more as a functional diagram. So you are building the diagram, you're seeing the flow, you're seeing your inputs and outputs, but you can also test this on the fly using the playground in Langflow. So if anything, it's adding as an aid to your existing developer flow. So it's helping you understand the logic a little bit more. And if anything, I think you're also controlling the logic too, being able to move the components and see which component connects where, and then run the flow, see where that goes, and iterate through different types of components. But that's what I think. I don't know, David, what do you think?
No, and actually, Melissa, you said something really key there. I think is a great example. Is kind of we use Figma and other types of tools, right? And this is really no different. One thing that I'll add on to what you said is Langflow. I use it. I recognize that I work for I work for Langflow. I'm very I'm very biased. Of course, but it's. As a developer, as somebody who's been developing for a very long time, and this actually, I saw the question, by the way, about the difference between Langflow and LangGraph, and I'm going to tie these together. As a developer, one of the things that I find that is extremely satisfying and allows me to move very quickly, especially now we're in the world of vibe coding, right? So how, it's well, what's the benefit, right? One of the really cool things I can do here, I mentioned here in this case before, that I can add these very complex flows. Well, think about it. Once I have my application and my application is talking to my flow here, for me now to add on a whole nother set of tools, a complex tool, another flow or anything is literally just building the flow and clicking it on, right? And I didn't have to change, I didn't have to touch a piece of code in my app. So I can focus my app on doing the things that my app is really good at and what it should be doing. And let Langflow handle essentially all of the AI portions. And then I can, from a development standpoint, allows me to iterate. Going back to another question from earlier, if I don't want to have to rely on Langflow as an API server or something like that, well, that's where I'll export my flow as a JSON and I'll import it in my code, right? So I find that, again, from the development and iteration standpoint, I really enjoy it as a tool because it allows me to move a lot faster. Now, I did say I saw the question between what's the difference between Langflow and LangGraph. The way I like to put it is Langflow is UI first. and then you build out the flow, you build out your agentic flow or your generative AI flow, and then you move to code if you need to. LangGraph is really code first. It's for people who are building on LangChain, right? And then it helps you visualize, what that looks like, right?
Mhm.
So they kind of start from different angles, if you will. If you're somebody who's
Yeah.
already building on LangChain and you're comfortable with that, build on LangChain, right? Like it's not gonna. I think it's one of those like 6 half dozen one the other. It really depends on like your particular code base, your expertise, all sorts of things. I would definitely argue that Langflow is a lot easier to understand and learn out of the gate. So but that's an opinion, right? It depends on who you talk to there. Let's see. Did we answer? I think we got the questions there. Okay. By the way,
Yep.
I saw a bunch of you put in your emails.
Yeah, it was running the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, how did the results come out? Like, I'd love your feedback on this, and if you want to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, did it totally gaff, or did it get it right, or something like that? I'd love to know.
Yeah, I'm looking at mine here. It's actually giving really great. I don't know if you saw this one that came in, David, but I asked, I'm doing a live stream on MCP servers. I don't know if you could pull that one up in your playground.
Oh,
I said
is
I'm
it
doing
you
a
or
live
who is it?
stream.
Let's see.
Yeah, I said I'm doing a live stream right now on MCP servers. Can you help me do a script? And actually, it kind of kicked off something over here.
Oh, did you do a thread?
Yeah,
I think. Oh, okay, I saw that. Oh, what?
I think that's the one. Is it?
Oh.
Yep, yep.
Oh, that's
Totally didn't
funny.
follow this going into the live stream today.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, hilarious. Hopefully,
Yeah, that's
I was oh, I see Aravind said hello, right? Hopefully you guys don't mind me. I see this is a travel one for sure. Oh, very cool. Neat. Yeah, no, that's great. So I'm glad you guys were all able to do that. Anyway, so with that, I know that we are getting close to time. I just want to make sure we have any follow-up questions taken care of. Are we good from that standpoint?
Kellyanne said, definitely makes production fast, makes the high level architecture more readable. Yes. But the main question is the underlying code generated optimal? Is every bit of optimization that is possible squeezed out?
Yeah. No, and that's that's a great question. I think it's very fair because I can totally understand potentially trepidation with you're like, I don't have control over that code. Can I make it better? Right. Or something along those lines. I can tell you, I know from the Langflow engineering standpoint, especially for the agents and a lot of the agentic stuff and the tools and everything, that is something they're constantly looking at, how to make these more and more and more efficient. But then you have to kind of trust that, right? So I would say to you, if that is a concern, right? Again, you have access to the code. This is an open source project. Feel free to take a look. And if there's something that can be improved. If it makes you too uncomfortable, right? And you're like, no, I need control over that code. There's no one saying that you can't, this is open source, right? You can you can pull it out if you want, or do it in LangChain or whatever. But again, I would argue that Langflow is actually quite fast, and the engineers are constantly working on like really optimizing these things to make them, as efficient as possible.
Yeah. And more things coming up that David was alluding to for MCP in particular. So definitely keep an eye out.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I see the any code or GitHub reference. If you really, really want it, like I said, I'm in the middle of creating materials on the email thing that I was just talking about. Here we go.
You're going to be doing a live stream on the email agent stuff, right?
Yeah,
David?
we're gonna do that again. So like this code is in like active development. This stuff. Boom, there you go. But that's the email agent interface if you're really interested. But expect that I'm going to have like changes, and updates to that one. Okay, and then I see, but Kaylin, when's the next Langflow South Bay event? Oh, from South Bay, wonderful.
Yes. So that is where I come in. We have one coming up here in the end of May. We had one on April 3rd. Kelly, and I don't know if you were there in person, but which is why you're asking. But so keep an eye out. Late May is when it's going to come out. So if you are subscribed to our Luma calendar, then you'll see that pop up.
Awesome.
So hope to see you there.
Awesome. And then I do see one other question before we close up here. I see from Donovan, any agents able to string building? Current MCPs for IDE control that way, Langflow via Langflow currently. I wonder if we're talking like a stringify thing, or if you're talking like a structured output kind of deal.
Current MCPs for IDE control that way. Are you talking about Donovan's question?
Yeah, Donovan's question. Yeah.
Langflow controlling IDE to build, debug, etc.
Oh.
Do you mean the flows that you are building in Langflow, or?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think I can. I think I know what Donovan's getting at.
Okay.
So tell me if I'm wrong, Donovan, here with this. But funny you should ask what you just asked. You'll see right here, like this mind map agent. So one thing I've actually been personally experimenting with lately is, could you set up, let's say, like a unit tester, or maybe an expert, coding agent that specializes in linting and all sorts of other things like that while you're coding. And here's my take on that. I've been vibe coding in lots of various IDEs. The base models, like again, 4.1, Claude, things like that, they're actually really quite good at those things if you're being explicit with them. Matter of fact, you can find that if you go into the cursor setting rules, you'll see I have rules about some of this stuff, right? Because I have definitely found that without some direction, they kind of miss on things. But if you tell them these things, and if you say, hey, I want you to build unit tests, I want you to use this kind of spec, or make sure you're always using a linter or something, then they will, right? And they're really quite good at it. So like, you could argue whether or not it makes sense to essentially cart off all of that context and everything into a Langflow flow. One thing I've been trying to use it for, and this is where like this mind map agent comes in, for those of you who like to diagram, if you like to build like, say, mermaid diagrams or like mind maps or whatever based off of your like code structure, the inputs and outputs, things like that, then this is actually something you can do. Funny enough, I wasn't actually going to show it today, but like this is something that I totally did out of Langflow, right? And it actually uses a combination of multiple MCP tools that do things like mermaid and stuff like that. I'd love to know if you think this is useful. but like, so it's like, I'm looking at it more from, since the base coding AIs are actually quite good at a lot of those tasks, what are the other more complex things that you could do with the Langflow? Can you do it? Yes, you can absolutely add in capability like this. And then again, it just becomes kind of a natural part of the conversation you're having with your agent. I hope that answers your question.
All right. He finds it useful.
Awesome. Good. Yeah. If you're the type of person who does like mind maps and kind of more visual representation of code, I would honestly love to hear from you because I'm working on something with that right now. Here, let me stop sharing, and I'm gonna pull my LinkedIn. I would love it if you reached out and let me know, because I want your thoughts, because this is actually something I've been actively pursuing. And there we go. There's that. And I think, if you think it might make a neat use case, or if you have other ideas for use cases that you would like to see with code or something in Langflow, let us know. Like, reach out and let us know, because then we can go make things happen. Right.
Yep. We're always building content. Our friend Arvind in the chat, he's actually one of our regulars now. So he's been also giving some suggestions for content, and it's been helping a lot. So we want to put out what you all want to see, what's most helpful for what you're building.
Yes, absolutely.
Real quick. Okay, we're running to time here. But I really want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in today. I hope you found the session interesting, took away some things in regards to MCP, learn, maybe get you quick started on how you can bring MCP into your Langflow flows or to other tools that you're building your AI applications. So we're gonna wrap up here. Again, I'm Melissa. I was Melissa. I'm Melissa.
She was Melissa. Who is she now?
Yeah, I don't know. And thank you, David, so much for sharing a lot of your demos and your nuggets of knowledge on MCP. We hope to keep in touch. If you're not in our Discord, we'll share that in the follow-up resources from Michelle. So please join there, ask your questions, give your feedback as well, what David was saying. And we will hope to see you in the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.